I'm really excited to kick off the next chat. So we are going to be talking to Kellie Conn, who's the Senior Director of People and Culture Business Partnerships at Mindbody, Inc., who clearly are great partners with Power to Fly and also the sponsors for this session. Now, Kellie prides herself on building trusting relationships with team members through communication and culture. Kellie believes strongly in aligning a company's vision with that of its teams to develop strong connections between individual, team, and company goals and outcomes. Now, she's going to be in conversation with our own fabulous Hunter Canning. Now, Hunter is a virtual event host here at Power to Fly, as well as an artist who has a passion for bringing people together to foster growth, kindness, and a true understanding of each other. I'm going to turn the floor over to you two. Take it away.
Thank you, Meg. And Kellie, thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
Hi, Hunter. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's such a delight. I'm so glad that we get to do this. And we're going to talk about the importance of language, and how how you can share with us some experiences you've had at Mindbody. So to kick us off, can you talk about first, how do we establish a shared language that promotes and boosts inclusion and belonging?
Oh, great starting question, Hunter. I'm so glad to see more attention being paid now and on a broader scale to inclusive language in the workplace. I was going to bring up a movie. There was a movie in the 80s that was called 9 to 5. And it was.
I'm aware of 9 to 5.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. So, in case you don't know the movie, I think it came out in 1980. So it's almost a classic now. It had Dolly Parton, Jane Fonda, Lily Tomlin, and it was a comedy about women in the workplace. But even though it was a comedy, it made a serious social statement. And I swear, I was 10 when it came out, but it was an influence on me. And I believe it was an influence on me going into human resources as a career. That movie, it does a great job, even with the comedy, to call out how language and people are treated differently in the workplace. And, I'd love to say we've come a long way since 1980, which was 43 years ago. But in fact, we still have a long way to go. You can watch that movie now and still see some word choices, some language, some behaviors that are still examples you might see something like that today in the workplace, where women are called girls, or people are treated differently based on their level within the organization. Physical appearance plays such a factor into language choices or how you think you can talk to somebody. So I think today, we can look at we've made some good improvements in some areas, but there's still a lot of opportunity out there. Today we often discuss diversity and inclusion in the same breath. And while they're definitely interconnected, they are, of course, still very different things, right? Preparing your organization to do well with one won't necessarily prepare you to do well with the other. Diverse organizations are hiring people with different traits and characteristics, but having a diverse workforce doesn't automatically translate into an inclusive culture. So I like to start there to talk about diversity and inclusion, are interconnected, but the approaches to do well on both are still going to have some unique approaches that and unique awareness that I think we need to promote within the workplace. In fact, having a diverse workforce makes it all the more important to have inclusive language, right? So today I know we're focusing in on specifically within inclusion on inclusive language and what we say or what we write. That affects how welcome and how included people feel at work, regardless of how we're different. Managers, individual team members, an organization's DE&I function, their human resources team, everybody plays an important role. It shouldn't be allocated to just one person or one team or one initiative to say, they own inclusion or they own inclusive language. Language is everybody's social responsibility to get right. And it has, though, part of the awareness I think we have now, Hunter, is that there's the awareness around unintentional microaggressions within language, unintentional cultural impacts that simple, deeply ingrained language choices can have. Creating that awareness is the first step. So it's not about being a word police or saying, you're bad, you said this word. It's all about creating that awareness about how, someone else's experience that's different than yours can experience language and words. We know from research that's been going on for more than a decade now that there are certain terms, gender-based terms, gender-coded terms that can really turn off a large group of our workforce, diverse and underrepresented people, especially within the workplace, candidates, employees, even customers that we interact with. We want our language at work to reflect that environment of inclusion, and we're still learning how to continue to do that better. So what we're striving for at Mindbody is the replacement of words or phrases that marginalize people because of their culture, their race, their ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, age, disability, socioeconomic status, and appearance, or any other factor that should not play a role in creating that inclusive environment at work that helps every individual bring their authentic self to work, where they can focus and where they can feel a part of something good and something valuable for them. Mm-hmm. Notice that I didn't say make people feel marginalized. It's not about what they, we want people to feel positive, but that language marginalizes. It doesn't just make people feel marginalized. And I think that in itself is an awareness that, language is powerful and words do things just like actions do things.
Absolutely. There's, oh my gosh, Kelly, there's so many gems in there and experiences and real situations, hypothetical situations. There's so much in there and there's so much we can unpack from there. And I'm curious if in there was also, I feel like there's a lot of unconscious behavior happening. There is conscious aggression and there's a lot of unconscious microaggression that you mentioned as well, the microaggressions. And I'm curious if maybe some of the folks listening if we can include them and maybe some of their experiences there, if you want to ask them any questions about maybe anything they've experienced.
Yeah. I don't know if we have this functionality broadly for all of our audience, but I think what we were going to try to ask the audience, if you do have access to the chat function there, if you want to put an example of exclusive language that was not inclusive, that maybe you've heard in the workplace or even outside of the workplace, just something you hear in use that can create those feelings of non-inclusion.
Yeah, thank you for that. So if you want to participate in that, you can put that in the chat. It'll be relayed to us here. And we can touch on these words and unpack some of these words and experiences. And we're grateful for your contributions if you feel comfortable doing so. So while some of that is coming in, can you talk about? So thank you for that overview. And can you talk about maybe one thing? Let's focus in on a job, like an HR professional, right? So they're taking a lot of different things. HR is trained in different ways. I don't know that there is like a hub to train all HR people, right? So what's one thing what's something that an HR leader can implement today in order to take steps towards establishing shared inclusive language for their teams?
Oh, great. Yes. Well, Hunter, I'm going to tell you two things. It's educate, but even more importantly, it's the facilitation of conversations. We have to get people the information to broaden understanding on this topic, right? So to give examples and create an environment of learning around it, around awareness, because awareness is always one of the first steps. Making someone aware, and ideally it's proactively before they, use a term that we would want to replace with a more inclusive term. People are less defensive, of course, if you can proactively educate them. But also, I think a really key part for any leader, any people manager, anyone that wants to be active, maybe someone who's on a DE&I committee within a company, looking for ways to continue the conversation. And that's what I mean by facilitate. Looking for ways to check in or to have maybe a more focused conversation on a certain type of exclusive language where people can talk through replacements for that exclusive language, where people can talk through kind of a temperature check on how we're doing. I mean, language is social, and social change is really hard. So educating without that continued conversation, it expires. If we're not talking about it, and something else we can do as HR professionals is proactively figure out a way for the organization to call it out when they hear exclusive language without it feeling like, the language police, or, making it a safe place to be able to improve as an individual by as a team looking for awareness around when that exclusive language is being used and how you can replace it with more inclusive language. So, help people agree on how to hold each other accountable and how others can hold each individual, to say, yes, please tell me if you hear something, establish some kind of a protocol where people can do that and feel safe about it, feel like they're doing it as a team. A couple other things you can do just as an individual person within an organization. If you're talking or writing for different levels of audiences within your company or your organization, you can either consistently explain your acronyms, right? I'm gonna call out acronyms specifically. And acronyms is really, they are trying to make language and communication easier, but so often they make people feel like, I don't know what that is, and so now I'm not part of this conversation, right? It could be business acronyms, it could be internal jargon for the company, and it's almost like a double-edged sword, Hunter. It's an irony. Acronyms and jargon and kind of like inside vocabulary words. I mean, really, in one way, they can make people feel like they're all a part of the conversation and like they're in the club. But if there are acronyms and jargon and language that keep people from understanding the message, that's automatically making them feel unincluded. They can feel like if they don't know it, that they're supposed to know something, it's distracting, but also it's just a really easy way to help people feel like they're not a part of the conversation. So, two approaches to acronyms that you could take to be more inclusive. One would be every time a speaker uses an acronym, they could explain it, but then that's kind of detracting from the whole reason you have an acronym, right? So I say the less acronyms, the better. Just call it out. I mean, unless it's something super simple like ASAP, that is a very broad understanding, just speak simply and don't use a lot of jargon, don't use a lot of acronyms. And whether you're speaking or writing, spell things out for people so that they can all feel like they're a part of the conversation, regardless of their level of understanding, unless you feel super confident that everyone in your audience is very clear on what those acronyms or what that jargon is.
Those are great tips. I don't come from tech, so I'm constantly being like, what does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? But I'm happy to do it because sometimes I'm doing it for the group. One of the great advice that my dad gave me when I was very young. He was like, man, I wasted so much time in my 20s pretending I knew what people were talking about. I was like, really? He's like, yeah, I just wanted to look cool. I wouldn't recommend it because then you get to find out about things if you ask questions. And I was like, my father really gave me permission to not feel like I'm asking a dumb question. But it's so easy to be on the other side of that and to be unconsciously excluding people, and sometimes consciously too. Like there are, aggression sometimes too, when people want others to feel othered. So, and I'm curious if, I'd love to rewind. You mentioned these great tips earlier about opportunities that feel appropriate for replacing some of that language. So if we could go right before we start talking about acronyms, right? So I would love to hear about, maybe, could you play out like a little example for me? It's like, okay, how do you have that conversation? Like, sorry, excuse me, I noticed you said something super offensive. Like, that's not how, that's the wrong way to do it. What's the right way to do it?
Right. Well, like we were saying earlier, anytime you can get ahead of it is great. If you can proactively talk about the awareness and, some examples for people to be proactively looking for when they might use those types of words is great. But let's say, hey, there's an opportunity to draw awareness to somebody in their language choice. Just like any constructive criticism, I think I would go that direction in terms of, hey, talk to them in private, let them know that, what your intent is, that you want an inclusive workplace, and that they do too. That this isn't about, correcting them or shaming them. This is about, us having a mutual agreement to call out anytime we see something that is potentially making people feel less than or marginalized, that, we're all in it to create this inclusive workplace. And there are different words we can use than whatever that person uses. I'll give you an example. Recently, we had a phrase used that I heard. It was policy assassination. I know, very aggressive.
I am literally clutching my pearls, Kellie.
Now, I don't know where this started, the phrase, but it started to go around with some of our leaders that the intent was good. The intent was, hey, we've got a lot of policies that maybe were written for our company several years ago, and they need refreshed to be efficient, to be up to date with current practices, with current culture, and even the language, to be refreshed and be more accessible, be more user-friendly, be and just making, steps that you have to follow, bringing them up to speed with technological access that makes things easier, or makes things,
go faster and be less clunky. So all that, like, everybody wants that, right? Nobody likes clunky processes. But rather than calling it a policy refresh or a policy update, that aggressive word, policy assassination, I mean, I can tell you immediately, the people who are responsible for writing policies and procedures are super smart, super, great business acumen. It's a really hard thing to write policies, and assassinating the policies. It sounds like you're being attacked, right?
Yeah.
It creates an aggressive flavor to the culture and the environment, as well as the person or people who are responsible for those, even if they didn't write them. It just sounds aggressive. So that's an example of where we got to come in and go, okay, we all know the intent was a shared positive intent. Let's rewind that and talk about replacement words for assassination.
Yeah. Wow. That is such a clear example, Kellie. So I love hearing about, that's a great example of what's going on that you've recently experienced. Can you tell me more maybe about other inclusive work environment through the use of language that's going on at Mindbody specifically?
Oh, yeah. Now, I'm going to say we are still young in this process. I think there's a lot of awareness that's just starting to kind of bloom, and I'm so happy to see it. One thing that I love that I'm seeing, Hunter, is people
at Mindbody and outside other organizations, they're kind of getting away from that concept of inclusion. It's good for business. Okay, great. Yeah, it is. That's a part of the conversation. But I'm seeing more of a broader conversation around it. That's not just like, having an inclusive environment will allow you to get more candidates and will allow you to have a more productive environment. And those are good, but there's more to it than that, right? So we're starting to talk about it in terms of people feeling a part of things, people wanting to be at Mindbody, people wanting to be there for the right reasons, not just for how much they get paid or what their title is, but because they feel a part of a culture that is a positive, inclusive culture that values diversity and that values personal differences. So first thing, I'm just so glad to hear Mindbody and elsewhere, the conversation is starting to stretch out farther than just those business advantages. Another great example where I've seen good evolution at Mindbody is, we're a wellness company. We support the wellness industry with our software. And we've had to really evolve and be careful and aware. And we have. I feel like our marketing team has done a great job about fitness versus wellness. So like, what is fitness? Well, you can have, I think where we started was, the rock hard, abs and, work your cut and, seeing these models of these super fit people in our marketing. And even, our Mindbody employee photographs or talking about fitness and how important it is, we have evolved to more of a wellness concept. And I've seen it been the last few years, we've really reflected different body types in our photography and videography for our marketing. I've seen executives, even when we talk about internal wellness, we're talking about the 7 dimensions of wellness, right? So we're talking about emotional wellness, spiritual wellness. We have the 7 dimensions of wellness promoted on our website for our employees. So, it's taken some time and we're still working on that. We still sometimes have discussions about competitions or, let's have a challenge, and so there's still opportunities about like, what does it mean to have an initiative where you want to promote wellness versus something more specific that might exclude some people based on their age or disability or their body size and make them feel lesser than. So, we're continuing to try to keep that awareness up front, but I feel like Mindbody's made some really good strides in that. We've also got a cool initiative starting up with our recruiting team where we're looking at some technology that actually helps scan any kind of job description document that we're getting ready to post to look for words that might be gender coded or otherwise are in a category of words that can turn off underrepresented candidates. So again, it's a lot of it is that more aggressive or words that unintentionally reflect a more exclusive culture than what we want to be at Mindbody. So I'm really glad, we're doing regular sweeps of our handbook. Right now we're doing it just kind of manually. And I'm so glad that this technology is going to help us, level up on that as well to be very consistent with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I love hearing about this evolution you spoke about that's happening with Mindbody over the past couple of years through fitness and wellness and how that's reflected in marketing and also internal language. And so for other companies and for Mindbody as well, like you used the word earlier, we were talking about clunky. No one likes anything clunky, right? So like, what is the planned obsolescence of policy, right? Like how often should we be updating this and how often should we be, the expectations I think is really important to talk about, right? Surrounding the language needs to be audited or updated or just even looked at a top level.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to establish that it should be going on all the time, right? It's not just like a once a year, we're going to do this checklist. But putting some kind of a process in place, make sure that it happens. And, again, like we said earlier, inclusive language should be everyone's responsibility. So it shouldn't just be, oh yeah, our HR team, they make sure that we check the policies once a year, or we check the handbook once a year. It should be baked in, but you have to start somewhere, right? So, I think an initial sweep through those employee facing documents and marketing is a great place to start. Handbooks, job descriptions, and then maybe instituting some kind of a inclusive language guide for managers and anyone that would work on employee communications, like a brand guide for inclusive internal communications. I think that that's not something we currently have, but it's something we're talking about. And I think that helps be consistent across the org and also kind of underscore that this is everybody's responsibility. Something on inclusive language and new manager training, I think could be very helpful. It helps those managers be more aware in choosing their words, but it's also sending the right message. Hey, this is something we really support and value, and we need you to do it as a manager at Mindbody. We need you to set the example and help your team members use inclusive language. And, ultimately, for a truly top-down endorsement, I think, it is really important to get to the top of the organization and have that, educational piece along with the facilitation about how are we going to show up as a company? What's our philosophy around this? And what specific actions are you, individual executive, going to take to help further it?
Yeah, wow, absolutely. It's so important for it, like you said, the top down, because the leadership is the public facing, is the employee facing. They have a lot of impact, and there's so much. You want leaders that you can look up to and leaders that you can follow, right?
Right.
So unfortunately, we're out of time. We have more questions. We could keep talking about this. It's a fascinating conversation. Kellie, thank you for making the time today. And is there, with the last 30 seconds here, is there anything you'd like to impart with us, ways that our listeners can connect to Mindbody, anything else you'd like to share and connect with you as well?
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, it's been a real pleasure to be here. I went so fast. I hope that something in there triggered some inspiration for your audience members. You can find Mindbody online at www.mindbodyonline.com. And I think we're putting that in the materials or the communication somewhere. And you're also welcome to connect with me, Kellie Conn, KellieConn, on LinkedIn. You'll see my face with a dog. That's me. But if you search Mindbody and Kellie Conn, I'll come up. So I would love to connect with you online. I'd love to talk further.
Great. Thank you so much. So they're dropping those links in the chat now. Check them out. Kellie Conn, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Hunter. And thank you, Power to Fly team and audience.